right, so this is a big topic today with, once again, my sister is joining me here, and we're going to be talking about validation, one of those sometimes cringeworthy words that we have and we sometimes shy away from. She actually sent me a wonderful quote from Bernie Brown that I think I'll start this little podcast with, which is, you either walk inside your story and own it, or you stand outside your story and hustle for your worthlessness. So that's a quote from Bernie Brown. Why did you send me that?
It resonated with me because I think that was, you can put things, you can read something a million times over in a million different ways, but then just in one moment in time, it's like, oh, I do hustle for my worthiness. That is what I'm doing. Yeah, like, it just seemed to encapsulate exactly what so many of us do, and continue to do, even when we're thinking we're self-evolved enough not to.
That perspective of what we think we're doing and what we're actually doing is this, where the validation is one of those big ones, whether we think we're going for reassurance or just to hear, like we involuntarily want a compliment, or we just want our work to be assessed, whereas actually we're looking for validation rather than actually feedback. And that's sometimes a really toxic little subset that we cycle that we can get in, because sometimes, especially if you're showing people for validation instead of for feedback, that's you're straight away setting yourself up for failure, aren't you, basically?
Yeah, letting them decide your worthiness. Also, you keep nothing you do gives you a sense of worthiness, and you're letting others compound that by saying, oh no, they agree with me, I'm not worthy, or that wasn't good enough to receive a compliment or a validation.
The even harsher side of that is when someone does give you validation and then you go, I just think they're being nice. And so you then find someone who's actually going to be critical or going to strip your work down and going to, be detrimental to it. So that cycle then continues and continues no matter what feedback you're actually given at the time. So that can be quite a difficult one. And I think this is, and I'm going to leap into this part of the topic straight away because you and I have spoken about it a little bit. As the new term is talking about, a recovering people pleaser myself, and I think you are a subset of that. And it is a fairly big group of people, and I think the hardest thing for that is, validation and people pleasing is, goes very, very hand in hand, and it's a very hard. Well, for me, obviously, it's very hard to step your way back from that, because obviously, as a people pleaser, you feel you're actually doing the right thing by, and it is heartfelt, and it is, you're trying to improve the lives of others, and yet that validation in that sense becomes very slowly corruptive and erosive, and that's a very hard thing to see in that, from the zoom out type of and also, and you and I have spoken about this before, like as that sort of person, like when you slowly stop doing that sort of thing, you have no foundation to stand on, you have no anchor points, because your whole personality is built around that of giving to others. And then what do you do for validation? And I think this is part of the things that you have come up with as part of this, external and internal. And part of that, when you don't even realize as a people pleaser how much of your is external, even though sometimes you can feel quite reassured and quite centered within yourself, but you don't realize it's actually sitting on a foundation that's actually, a bit of quicksand underneath you.
I would have sort of considered myself someone who isn't necessarily this concept of hustling for worthiness. I would have said, oh no, I'm okay with where I'm at, and I think in the back of my head sometimes I'm like, I'm just a girl from Julia Creek, like I've come a long way. Come on, like you don't know.
I've done enough. From my background, I've done enough.
So I thought I was okay with myself, but then as you lose the things that you're considering part of your self-worth. So work, doing things for others, pleasing others.
Yeah.
So, where do I get my sense of worth? Where do I get any validation from? If those avenues you'd normally use to build yourself up, yourself, like I have to say, like normally I'd say yes to most things.
Mm-hmm.
I can't now, and it's more comfortable now than it used to be. But at the start of saying no for my own health, it's incredibly uncomfortable. Because I based I wanted validation for doing for others, and I based some of my worth on doing for others.
So even though you obviously have a very credible reason and also reinforcing reason, like if you do say or keep going down the path of saying yes, this is going to be not only destructive but utterly catastrophically disruptive. Yes. Which is, thank you again for making the time and the energy for doing this. And I do.
This is less catastrophic. I'm in my house. I'm leaving house.
But it's still, we did have to work around your commitments of energy wise, and I think that was important because either one, I wouldn't have been as cognitive as I should be, like even though you are my sister, but you still can go, but I remember you as a young person goes, I can burn the candle at 5,000 different ends and throw a bomb in the middle and still get up, so you have that perception of what someone can do and that sort of stuff as well, like, so you can sometimes bulldozer in when you don't even mean to, like, and also that quiet you're saying no, but I think you're okay, like, you can do this one time, that one time thing, and then you going, as your big brother, obviously you would have wanted validation from me, but to step up and do something. I think that's the trap we all have with either with close friends or whatever the situation is, where it's a one-off, I'll step up and get the validation I need or want, but what's the price later on, unless we have that, which is what you're talking about the transferring from the external to the internal, validation of self-worth, which is that big ugly word of self-care and self-worth. Ooh.
It is. It's problematic. No, I think it's also that what's reinforced is pushing through.
Yes.
What's reinforced is showing that you can push through no matter what, whether that's in terms of physical health or if you're having a hard time emotionally or whatever it is. Our society validates and reinforces pushing as far as you can. And also, as sort of culturally, I think Aussies are about you do it tough and you be tough and you don't show weakness and vulnerability.
That little part of that.
So I've had to sort of self-validate that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to admit that
which is really weird.
It's really weird. Don't like it, but getting better at it. Getting better. But you can feel the sense of when you do it, you can feel like how hard it is. You can feel how much it takes to do it. So why don't we validate, like, anything else that's that hard, we will be like, oh my gosh, that was so hard. Well done.
Well, for me, I know separating that from also weakness, like separating those two things out was a big, and has been, and probably always will be a little bit, but it's certainly getting a lot better. That whole thought of worthiness and that sort of thing from weakness, because sometimes those two things can interact and collide with each other quite strongly. And certainly for me now, the language importantly has separated, which I think is a very good point for people to remember. Like when their word association with one definitely means that, but also it goes into a category of those as well. You know, it's very hard to step away and to allow yourself to have that validity to say yes, to say no, to give yourself time to, you know, whatever the case is. Whereas when it gets all shoveled into that one bin, and this, I think we've talked before, you know, where words have power, because the words that are going around in your head, if they're all bunched together in one side and you don't pluck out one that has a definite meaning, and it actually has a context a different way, then yes, they're all used as a big battering ram to beat yourself down with. And I guess that's what you would have found.
Oh, definitely. Acknowledging most, if not all of us, have a bully inside. Like,
yes,
an inner bully, an inner critic that that leads you astray every time. Basically, doesn't do us.
It's not there to be your.
And it's not. You know, I think we were sort of, you know, whatever. What is it? What's the one about? Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, sort of thing.
Yeah, very much so. Yes.
It's like I can show my strength without having to be tested, like constantly. Constantly.
Yeah.
You know, or not having to fight against yourself just to do, you know, just to have a quality of life.
And that whole concept of I don't have to show I've survived because I struggled. And almost wanting to struggle, like, which is such a weird thing. Not that you're going out of your way to struggle, but that you're somehow embracing it and constantly staying in the struggle rather than there must be easier ways to do this and that.
Yeah. Look, I think it all sort of comes back to, I think, which is something we weren't raised to do, or didn't know how to do, was just sitting in any of these, sitting in your feelings, sitting in your truth.
Yep.
Not trying to prove where you're at or where you're not at. So neither having to sort of talk yourself up, as in you're doing something amazing, or necessarily, like, you know, the opposite, as we're talking about. Just sit in the truth of where you're at and be okay with.
That's a very, very to find that truth without obviously the internal bully, or as you normally swing, then you go to that toxic positivity, which is, as you and I have discussed, we both found that a very fake, false. So we couldn't embrace it anyway. Like, so you couldn't, even though, you know, look at yourself in the mirror type thing. You just couldn't do it. And then you validate yourself. Your validation of yourself becomes even harsher because you couldn't somehow embrace that positivity that they talk about. Like, not that it's such a big push these days, but, you know, where that positive, you must be positive, you know, and they talk now of, you know, you don't have to see every situation in a positive light, but you just allowing yourself to, as you said, like, just to sit with the situation and sometimes be grateful, to accept, to, you know, forgive in other situations. And once again, forgiveness doesn't have to be a weakness in terms of, and you don't have to necessarily forgive the person or a situation rather, for it to still be a situation that works out as a positive indictment to your own strength.
Yeah, definitely. And I think not only does, you know, we've talked about the positive, toxic positivity doesn't work for us, and I think doesn't work for a lot of people, but also I, you know, back in my former life, million years ago, you know, I do this workshop on building up your self-esteem muscles.
Yep.
And I actually really liked doing that workshop.
Okay.
I liked doing it, and I had really good interactions with the groups. You know, they felt like we were doing something that was worthwhile.
Yep.
And now, I'm like, that self-esteem isn't something that works for me because I've got nothing to anchor my self-esteem to.
Oh, okay.
That I would have previously. So now for me, it's about self-compassion. So it's not.
So how do you differentiate the two then? Self-compassion and self-esteem?
So for me, other people have different interpretations. My interpretation is, instead of trying to list all my skills, sounds like I've got a lot. Instead of trying to list my skills or my strengths or my accomplishments in inverted commas.
Oh, okay,
To build yourself up and make yourself feel okay. It's like, no, just I'm okay as I am. Like, I don't have compassion for who you are, where you're at, what you've been through. It's okay to be me just as I am. I don't need to build myself up. I don't need to think about all the things I do well. It's like, no, just in this moment, I'm, anxious, or in this moment, I don't feel like being on top of it all, if you know what I mean. Like,
yeah.
That
that point there where you said, I'm on top of it, that's a really funny one, because sometimes some of the stuff I talk about with some of my guys, where they can't recognize that I'm on top of it myself, because they don't feel on top of it themselves. Whereas if you ask a colleague, what would you describe it, and they go, they're always on top of their work. Like, whereas, like sometimes you can be on top of your work, even though emotionally you're feeling overwhelmed, or you're feeling, whatever. So that's a really good one. And I think that must have taken a while, though, for you to have the skill and the self-knowledge to go, these are my things. These are my things. As a truism, not as a what people or what you think you should be saying, saying.
It took a while for it to feel like it was helping. Like, as in, I can read things academically, read literature on it and be like, oh, okay, I see where this is going, or I see where that's helpful, or that seems like a good way to try and help with the bully or the inner critic. But it takes me quite a while, and reading it in different ways, before you find something that you're like, oh no, I feel that. I actually feel you feel it. And sometimes that takes a bit more resources, because when you're not well, you don't have the resources to think logically or clearly. And sometimes the critic takes over because you just don't have the resources to fight it. So on the slightly better days, you can sort of logic it out and think it through, and then hopefully at some point sort of feel the difference of trying to build yourself up with all these things versus, no, you know what? I'm okay. I'm okay with where I'm at.
Yep.
This is the truth of where I'm at.
So how did you land on those truths, though?
How did I land on them? I think it was a process of everything else being taken away, to be honest.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So literally stripped in a way of your
based it on everything else that it was a house of cards of which I'd based things I wanted validation for, or the things or the self-esteem. So as each one gets taken away, you kind of bit of a slap in the face, like, that feels crappy.
This.
That's crappy.
This will make me a better person.
So it's sort of as you just, I don't know if I would have gotten there without sort of things being taken away. Obviously I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
You would have been a well-rounded person without all that other stuff happening.
I might have come to it eventually, hopefully. But certainly having it taken, like, you can't sort of, what it's like to meet people for the first time.
What do you do?
Somebody else is like, what do you do? Either they're talking about work, or what have you been doing as in with your life?
Yeah.
I don't have the set answers that make myself comfortable or make the other person feel comfortable.
Yeah. Oh, no, I totally understand that.
People aren't comfortable if you're like, oh, actually, I've been in bed for, weeks.
Yeah, so that whole, how's your day? Right there is that conjunction point for you. Go, fine. Or, it's very similar for someone in pain. Just normally says, I'm fine. Yeah. But they're probably at 18.
Yes.
What you consider painful.
Normal. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a normal.
They're normal every day. They're used to shoving.
So that comes to like a really great quote that that I think of, which is what is it? Change the way you look at things, and the things you look at will change. And that's that whole, rewiring, re-switching of, which I guess you're talking about, very much your self-worth is based on very vastly different things than what you would have thought of 15 years ago.
But it's interesting also, I think I realized that, when I was working out there in the world and doing a job I thought was very productive, working with a client group that, I was very honoured to be with. But, if you go out and meet someone, I didn't feel that, I didn't say, oh, I'm a counsellor or I'm a psychologist, or I just say I work in health, because I didn't feel the need. I knew inside myself I was doing something that I was getting self-validation for. Whereas exact same now, I can find myself looking for validation. Whereas before, I had it internally. I was like, oh no, I feel okay. I don't feel the need to express what I do for work or list any of that. And it's the exact same process now, just because I don't have it as my anchor or my base. You have to, you get a bit lost unless you work through what that means, means basically, and how to find it again based on something else.
How would this have landed without? So you're saying part of that journey is of everything being stripped away. Okay, so your external is stripped away. So how do you do it without that happening, do you think?
Oh, how do you work through that? I think it's got to come to a point where most of us have to come to a point where it no longer serves us. Because, you're going to change. If it's still serving you to be hustling for your worthiness, like that's still.
But how do you recognize that? Because that is probably the one of everyone's blind spot. Like you don't realize that's like I can't outperform anxiety. That's your blind spot. You think the next person, the next thing that will give me the validation or give me the confidence that that tick of the box, that little plaque, that little award, that little whatever will be the thing that changes everything, rather than how can I recognize that that's what I'm actually doing, even if someone stares me right in the face and says, you realize this is what you're doing. Like, how do you step towards that, do you think?
Lay out some avenues for people. You can lay out, but if it's a bottomless pit for some people, they've kind of got to get to, whether it's burnout, whether it's just exhausted themselves in different ways.
They're the two obviously
like,
reset moments. So a reset. So you've got to take advantage of the reset moment often.
But I think it's also that you don't have to, like I said, you don't have to feel it. You don't have to, it doesn't have to feel, it's not going to feel comfortable. So it's not going to feel, I've decided to do life this way. No, I've decided and now everything's fine. No, it's a process of gentle steps. I think one of the bits of literature was about, which I really liked, it was leaning into courage. So kind of, if it's always something you're looking for validate, if always say something like this, instead of sort of asking 20 people, oh, is it okay? Should I do this? Should I be putting this up on that? Lean into courage and do it anyway. So you don't have to necessarily, I don't mean you feel brave. I just mean you courageously just take a step without the validation. So without someone telling you it's okay or it's good or this works, just lean into courage.
So relying on your own work, your own, how would you describe that?
It's more just about, it's kind of just taking a leap that's just giving yourself permission to do something anyway. Giving yourself permission to take this step, even if no one else gives me validation for it, even if no one else sees the value in it or understands. and just building, and that can be the small, I don't mean that's a giant step from 0 to 100. I mean the smallest step, the very smallest step you can make, and just see how that feels. Or the other one is a pause before you. So, you know, instead of always sort of, even at work, saying, you know, is that what you wanted? Is that right? Is that, you know, always asking.
Okay. Yep.
Is that how you want it? Yep. Just pause, and you just kind of ask yourself, do I think that's right? Do I?
Because if you've taken that pause, you can also then think, if they are about to ask you a question, you can go over this is why I think it is, rather than being totally blown off track straight away and going, oh, so you don't think so I should do that. Like, so that way you're actually standing by your work, or standing by your thoughts, or standing by your values in that moment.
Just literally, and I honestly mean, like, at the very start, if you're someone who always says, is that right, or is that what you wanted, or what do you think, which I go, what do you, I say that all the time. All the time. I've said it already. Does that make sense? Is that, you know, I'm looking for that.
As you should, because you should be looking for my validation, I feel.
The dynamic. It's hard not to want it. Literally just a few seconds at the start, like a few seconds just before you go, what? And then try to extend those seconds out to minutes. Because you're not sort of entering that dynamic with someone with this open thing of like, give me validation. It's like, no, I'm just going to take a pause. I'm okay.
So that, I think that leads into then really understanding your tribe. And that's like your inner tribe, but even your slightly outer circle of, you know, there are some that are just positive. They're going to be positive about your work. Let's say, if we take that as an example, some are going to be neutral, and some are going to be are just negative no matter what. And so, you know, if you are looking to get critical feedback, you know, who do I? So you're making that distinction. I'm actually looking for critical feedback rather than validation. You know, those two things can go together, obviously, but if you're looking for validation and critical feedback, sometimes those two things don't necessarily work hand in hand in any way.
Yeah, and and then obviously being compassionate when you receive feedback. With yourself, I mean. With yourself, I mean. It's just sort of like just having a sense of compassion with yourself as to where you take that feedback or that analysis.
Letting that sit with you for a little bit and mulling, like, and not taking it as a sledgehammer slap. Because, you know, criticism, whether it is well-meaning or correct or whatever, can still hurt. Like it is your work. So allowing yourself to have the emotion of the thing run through before, and once again, that is not tied to your self-worth or your worthiness. The fact that you have received criticism or feedback, like those two things are not tied to whether you're, you know, your worthiness, because, you know, you can be obviously doing amazing and still, in order to grow or to change or that it was misdirected, like any of those things can still have criticism, and they're not tied to your self-worth.
No, I think it's also you're deciding that your worthiness is yours.
Yes, which that's a weird. Like the English language is, you think, well, that's obvious, but it's not how we operate. Like, self-worthiness is an obvious sentence in the English language, and yet we do not use it in that way sense at all. We usually, as we're talking about here, like in terms of validation and self-worthiness, like that we give up to other people all the time, unconsciously or consciously. And sometimes, you know, I think that one that we talked about last time, where, you know, be careful who walks through your mind. Like, that's the classic example of, you know, be careful who you pin your self-worthiness to in that situation. If it's not yourself, like, if you're not giving it to yourself, then you're already.
We're often conditioned to keep seeking it from those who aren't capable of giving us either the validation or the sense of worth. Like, we're often conditioned to, that's the person we desperately want it from.
Yes.
And for whatever reason, they're not capable, willing, or just are unaware that that's what you're seeking.
Yes. Like sometimes the kind thing is actually they're blissfully unaware that that's what you're doing, and other times, obviously, you know, they are like they have their own situation that they're dealing with, and they're, you know, validating their own actions, you know, by suppressing something that you're doing. That's it. That's big, you know, and that, I guess, that comes then down to, do you actually really understand your own values, you know, and self-worthiness, you know, has to sit somewhere within those value cores.
And I think I don't know why. I think for a long time, you know, I've always said that, you know, do things based on your values and tap into your values to find your direction, and you know, let that guide your core values, like that is your motivation or your directional. But I don't think it didn't resonate with me for like.
So so that's a really interesting, because I would have said core value is caring, but as a people pleaser, that's actually skewed. Like, yes, I am caring, and yes, I am respectful, yes, I am all those things, but the caring value, while that is one of my values, is vastly, you know, twisted around when you put people pleasing as one of the hidden sides of that. And so if you then use your, as you say, core values to let yourself guide you, you are going down that pit all the time.
Definitely.
And then validation gets tied to that, which gets an anchor, which then sinks you down into, and I don't know why you end up in burnout, and it's all a bit weird, really. Values is a funny thing, because you've got to be careful what's tied to them. Like, and I think the hard thing for us is they can be our values, but when you then look at how, like, as say, people pleasing is tied to that one in particular, how detrimental in some ways, depending on what paths in life you choose, you know, how that can manifest to really slowly, you know, eat you up, basically. And yet caring in itself is, what a wonderful, lovely value to have.
Except I never knew the line between what you sacrificing all of yourself.
Yes.
Versus having that as a core value, yet it also is internal. So it's an internal value.
Yes.
An internal caring, an internal.
How can you be caring as your value if you say no? Like, how can, which is then the whole external validation. I can't say no. Like, so you're validating yourself by saying no. You're invalidating yourself in this other way by constantly saying yes, but my core value is caring. You're like, that is my paradox that is burning up.
And that fried my brain for a long time, I think. Kept me, what do you call it, developmentally, sort of in that same spot. Like, I never sort of, because I couldn't reconcile those two. They were very hard to reconcile.
Yes. Yeah.
Or even hard to reconcile because don't know whether you'll agree or not, but that's I felt like I was sort of a little bit more of the sensitive one in our family, but that wasn't valued. Like,
I see what you mean. Yeah. No, totally. But you had a language or actions for doing. I was sensitive, but not quite in the same way. But
Yeah.
I would not say it.
Yours is more internal.
Yes, yeah. And mine was I was confused by it. I didn't know what to make of the dialogue. Whereas you would express it, whereas I would internalize it. But then I didn't have anyone else to talk to about that, so I didn't know. Like, so it kept bunting up against the same thing all the time. So I totally understand that. Which go on.
I was just going to say again, it's, whether I would have, as a child of something, just, you've got nothing to prove. This is your truth. This is your story. This is, you're allowed to be who you are. Like, I don't know how that would have affected me as a child, but our generation, that wasn't a thing, really.
Oh, no. No. That
wasn't a thing. And that's
and also in the capacity to do, like, I don't think, there's certain situations we just don't, there's not the capacity, there's not the ability to be able to live, like, yes, live your own life and your own journey, but at some point there in life there is just not the capacity to be able to do that. Like, it's just simply not possible. So I guess, what do you make of that? And, like, does that eat you alive, or do you adapt and change, and do you make the best and the most of whatever situation without it? This is what I can do. And I guess that comes down to then, acceptance and validation. Like, they're two things. Like, I accept, if I'm looking for external validation, but I accept this person either doesn't understand the concept of that validation point or feedback point, or that is their view. That doesn't have to be my view. Like, so if I've reached out for validation and they've come back, and that's a friend and I were talking about this the other day, like, where he had certain views about a topic, and he reached across and heard other views, which he actually, the views were put very concisely, and that he went, okay, that's actually very reasonable. How does that make me feel though? Like, that's just because there is that change point, or is that other point, or that other option, does that make it valid to me? And I guess that's part of that external internal dialogue as well. And, like, if you're self-worth, then you can have those two dialogues going off without necessarily being in conflict with yourself.
Yeah, I think so. Allowing for complexity is not something that takes a long time to get used to within yourself and within others.
Yep.
There's no simplicity to any of us. We're all extremely complex being trying to interact with each other. And it gets very messy. So yes, your sense of self, you've kind of got to try really hard to find it, or find ways to stay true to yourself. But I don't mean stay fixed, like you said with the friend, like staying open, if that's true to yourself. Like, me, I love to discuss both sides of, I love those kind of discussions where you're actually talking both sides of an issue.
Yes. Which doesn't happen as much yet. With an openness, not a fixed. Yes. Yeah. That's which I guess we're really missing, at the moment. And those conversations can be quite interesting, because they can obviously start at a certain point, but end up, somewhere completely different. If you are open to hypotheticals and but what if this situation, and that's where we sometimes get into that. Well, if this person thinks, and I really think a lot of this person, does that mean I need to agree in everything they say or everything they do? Like, whereas we're often told at the moment, like, you have to be, it's an all or nothing, type strategy. And I guess, validation goes a little bit with that as well. Like, if you're fixing to one person for your validation as well, that same all or nothing strategy, then you're molding yourself to that shape as well, which comes that,
you
know, where is your self-worth? Where is your center? Where is your internal dialogue actually saying, you know, are they drifting off where should be centering myself, that is me? And am I parroting thoughts and feelings that actually necessarily, and that sometimes you can see that where you don't necessarily have to understand your feelings, but if you allow them to sit with them, then they become a little clearer. Whereas if there are other people's, it's that battering ram response. You know, it is because it is. Like that's, you often see that a little bit, where it is because it is. And that's because they're not necessarily your thoughts, or they can be thoughts from your past but aren't necessarily true to you now, but you can't explain it any other way. It is because it is.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, I think who you are looking for validation from and why.
Yeah.
And then also, how does that affect you when you don't get the type of validation you are looking for? Because I don't know about you, but I often find quite often when you do get validation, it's not quite what you are. Like, quite often it's not quite what you hope. I was like, no, there's this other thing that I thought was
I
should be getting a bit of extra.
Even though it can be quite positive, and you, oh, okay, yes, that's it's, even though it was positive, it's somehow not positive because it wasn't quite how you shaped it, thought it should be. No, totally. And watching that, even when you're giving feedback or whatever, when the words can be very similar, but it hasn't landed with them the way they were expecting to hear it, see it, whatever. And that can be interesting when you're the one that's being the one that's being asked to validate someone else. And you are, for all intents and purposes, validating their situation, but for whatever reason, the words aren't matching what they had in mind, or the action they had in mind, or the time frame they had in mind. You know, even just watching that can be this huge, you know, you might as well have been yelling and screaming at them sometimes, because it still has that, still has that same effect, which is quite, I know as a coach that used to make me quite, you know, because in my own internal dialogue, it's going, but I'm giving you credit, I'm giving you understanding, I'm giving you, and yet you're watching this person almost disintegrate in front of you with good news. And it took me a little while to then go, you know, what are you hearing? What are you, you know, what are your thoughts? And then validating that thought from them, and then going forward in that conversation. Whereas, you know, sometimes as a people pleaser, when you're seeing someone disintegrate, you're sort of trying to get out of the conversation rather than lean into that conversation.
Rather than go further in.
Whereas, which is what you're saying, sort of, you know, lean into that courage point. Whereas that would have been the time, not necessarily deliberately, but subconsciously, you're sort of trying to back out. You're going, I don't know why this is falling apart, and I just don't want to. I don't want to be the person that.
You've hit it. You've triggered a pain in others, and you're like doing anything to try and like alleviate that pain. Whereas you've got to kind of go further in towards it to get to what they need from you, or why they need it from you. Because, you know, as we've already said, like, everyone deserves encouragement, everyone deserves feedback, everyone deserves, you know, validation. It's just from whom, when, and if it's not what you were looking for, then you've got to kind of give it to yourself. Because, you know, say you you've still got this amazing thing they did, like, you've got to say, I did this. You know,
and that's same on both sides. Like there is still, and that's I think as a coach, like as a male coach, like that confronting of someone crying, like that didn't mean, like, for a male that first means, oh, that obviously you first told that must be weakness, but then you learn more. But it's still like, whereas now I'm quite comfortable to sit in that space and to lean into that space, and to let someone just hold that space, and finding out that it's usually nothing to do with what you think it is, like tears. Like very, very rarely is it what you're told is what you're told as a young adult, as a male young adult, that, you know, the sign of weakness, the sign of this, sign of that, you know, that they're just overwhelmed and they can't cope with the situation. It's, you know, that is 0.0001, and if it is that, it's because of this thing. Like, it's not, you know, it's nothing to do with weakness in that situation. So validating tears is actually a really liberating thing. I think that works well for both sides, I find.
Oh, I think it's incredibly valuable to sit with someone and not try to do a cheer up or a chin up or like a, you know,
smile.
Like, you know,
smile.
Come on, let's, or even, you know, like then list everything there, you know, try to.
Oh, you go the other way.
Better. So no, just sit with them and just hopefully give them the space to maybe work through whatever's actually happening.
Yep.
Or not even work through it, just sit with them and that it's okay. It's completely okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that's certainly something that I think is invaluable as a particularly I would think you know, when you've got clients who are, I assume, you know, they're competing, they're having to put themselves out there a lot, like horse and rider.
Yep.
Yeah, you put yourself out there a lot, and you know, a lot of
to
times,
be judged, to be you are
judged.
You're not hiding in any way, basically.
Yeah, you know, so they've got to show a lot of courage in a lot of different ways, which can make you feel strong, but also very vulnerable because you're constantly
very vulnerable. Yeah.
So
and that whole spotlight effect of, you know, you feel, even if you're not, you feel like you are, like
everyone's everyone's looking at you, kind of thing, or everyone's thinking this, or
so how does self-validation work in terms of, like, how does it hold itself next to worthiness?
I think self-validation is more about your what's the right word? So your internal experience. It's kind of about taking all the context of that moment. So your internal experience. So when someone's crying, it's not about that thing. It's about all these other things. And to be able to self-validate, to say, you know what, I'm really sad right now. And given everything that's gone on, that's perfectly reasonable. Like, it's perfectly okay. Or, you know, perhaps you're not performing, you know, so it's with horses again, you're not performing to a level you thought you would be. That's okay. You're okay as a person. You're still just as valuable as you were last week when you thought you were performing better. You know,
the result is in the
still
moment.
That kind, wonderful, you know, person who's doing their best they can. Whose journey has been a lot to get to this point. So that's kind of taking in all the context of yourself and being okay with it. This one moment doesn't define you.
Doing a checklist of your own content, and trusting that that defining there are moments aren't defining in that situation.
But also no one else, even those closest to, like, hopefully there's someone close enough to you who's got an idea of what you might be going through, but no one has a really full picture of what it might have taken to get, you know, like say that morning, you know, you've gotten bad news, or you're just really anxious and upset that morning. So what it took to build yourself up to go back out into the world, present yourself to the world, is massive. Unfortunately, most people around you aren't going to notice what that took. So you've got to notice it for yourself. You've got to actually be like, you know what, this took a lot for me to be here today, to be upright, or to be whatever the situation. Like, just acknowledge your own experience. Rather than waiting for someone else to be like, hey, well done, you know, for getting here. That may not.
So do you journal that, or what? How do you find that to get that context?
Yeah, I do journal it. I also, quite more than I ever used to, I guess, now, both in terms of when the thinking sort of is, you know, inner critical bully's going astray. It's like, I journal it to acknowledge, it's like this, my inner bully is being an ass. And so what are the, you know, how do I not counterpoints to that, not how do I defend myself?
So
not trying to defend myself.
That's really good. You're not. I think that's because that goes circular then once that happens.
Rather than engaging with it, it's just, you know what, I am me. I'm doing the best I can.
Yep.
This is the skin I come in. This is this is the life I lead. That sort of thing. And writing it down definitely does help. Both externalize it, makes it more salient, makes it resonate a little more.
Did that take a little practice to get into a good writing structure, or just the ability to take it from to the page without it seeming nonsensical, even though it's perfectly okay to be nonsensical?
Yeah, very much so. I without editing it, without judging it, without even analyzing it, really. It's just literally getting it out.
That's it, really. Sometimes just blip on the paper is actually a really good thing.
Mine was more practice to do it in the immediate, at that point in time. Like sometimes I used to think, the way we were taught was like you do it in the morning or at night. And that doesn't really work very well for me. I need to do it like just a note on your phone, or I need to do something somewhere.
I find that note on the phone is great. Like that, a voice memo sometimes is as good as writing something. I kind of need to sometimes sometimes it has to be a physical thing, or sometimes a voice memo is fine.
But also I find finding something that's a reminder for you. So I'm not wearing it today, but sometimes wearing, like if you're wearing a little pendant or a bracelet that says, I'm worthy, or I am enough, or you got this, just having something symbolic on you, with you, to touch, to hold, just to ground yourself, base yourself in that truth. Sometimes it needs a physical reminder. I think for some people to actually hold on to it a little bit more, so it's not quite as abstract. It's a little bit grounding yourself in it as a constant reminder, because if you're getting battered both internally yourself, you're battering yourself, but also it's coming from outside forces that are you need something to hold on to that just grounds you a little bit in your truth, in your worthiness is yours.
That's I really love that, because I sometimes get people to have a wristband or whatever which is go for it, or this is the moment, or things like that, and I've seen others where like you're writing on your glove or whatever, just a little reminder,
that's a good one.
that sort of thing, where they can just look at it, and sometimes it can be just 2 or 3 words. They don't have to be in themselves, don't have to have extraordinary momentous thing, but sometimes it's as you said, like just grounding in that moment that gives you the validity to just recenter yourself and trust yourself, and give yourself that, or remind yourself that you've done the work, or you are everything to be in this moment. You're here, and I think that can be that great little thing which changes it from that external, especially if you're feeling it overwhelmed externally, to then bring it back to center. That sort of validity I find is really can be quite powerful for certain things.
Definitely. And it's also none of the things we're talking about is a permanent state. So you're not permanently feeling great. No one is permanently feeling great about themselves, I don't think. I don't think. It's not a permanent state.
So
always
I think that wins the journal. This too shall pass. Like that. Which you don't understand. That you don't. Everything feels momentous sometimes in a moment, and we do. As you and I talked about before, like things that can feel horrendous are often 60 seconds they're gone, like if you look at it properly, whereas it feels like it's hours or days or weeks or whatever.
I think we tend to think once you've reached a you've had some major realization about yourself or your life or your anything, that we hold on to that at all points. So
totally.
It comes and goes. We feel we feel one thing, next moment, like you said, we feel the next.
Which
so
is
anything kind of grounds you.
Yeah, which is that whole validate, like where you go, if I get that validation, that'll hold me for. But if you're constantly searching for external validation, it's it's that dopamine hit that will go just as fast as anything else. Whereas internalizing, as you said, will hold you in moments where you need it.
Yes, and I do, and I think I was one of those people who, I know, was one of those people who, even when I did get external validation, because I never felt particularly comfortable with it.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
I was a bit the opposite. I wasn't constantly seeking it. It was if I got it, I kind of was like, I don't need it. But then when I got it, I was like, oh, this is a bit tough. This is a bit raw. I don't feel that comfortable. So yeah, that was minus. Rather than being a bottomless pit, it was kind of like I shut the pit and went, I don't need it.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, no.
Learning to do the opposite, like let a bit in. Come on, you deserve it. You're allowed to.
And it's that really weird thing of you can be self-reliant and yet need validation. Like that was that whole self-reliance was a really strong trait, but then needing validation, or as we said, like as a people pleaser, like that part of validation was in contrast to that. But then that's what lets you burn harder, I guess, in the long run.
Yeah, I don't know. Tell me what you think. Totally don't know what you think. There's another way. There's a totally opposite way of looking at it, which is kind of radically accepting. So what if you lived a life unseen, unrecognized, sort of unrewarded, sort of thing? Is your life any less? So is it?
That whole
the hubris of thinking. Yeah, the hubris of thinking life only has value if it's understood or validated by others. Perhaps radically accepting my life doesn't have value based on if I don't get it.
So the hubris of thinking your life is only value if seen, understood, and validated by others. So, but and I think that's a really good thing. The power comes from once you realize it doesn't, but you need to go through that process first. I think that's one that can only be fully valued once you've actually been on the other side of that value system, like of feeling that you need validation to then realizing that you don't need validation. And I think that's probably at its most powerful in that sense, in that moment. And that can obviously be a lifelong journey or, some sort of journey to get there. But I think it is more, but like if you have always been felt like wonderfully self-grounded and didn't need validation, you're obviously a slightly unusual person, but there are people out there that don't need as much external validation. But if you go from a person that has required, needed, asked for that external validation for whatever reason to a person that is quite comfortable, as you said, in your own skin, then the power of that is beyond significant. Like it is immense, because now you are literally comfortable in whatever situation. That doesn't make you invulnerable to doubt, but it makes you open to being able to explore and being able to sit with a lot of different situations that you couldn't have before.
Yeah. And again, you may reach that at certain moments in your life, and at certain moments that's it's not attainable for you, just based on where you're at, what's happening in your life, and other things that are taking away all your powers of cognition to resources somewhere else.
Like with anything, as you said, like when you are feeling weak, tired, fatigued, those things can get shaky, but the longer you are in that phase, the better those are.
Yeah, and I think I don't know, obviously, because I only did competition at a very local small town level, and only as a child, whether any of that would get a bit more warped by being in, like, continuing to compete as an adult.
Yeah, there's
you don't think
but I think that's same sort of validate. Like, I don't think that's validation in your workplace. Like when you get that corporate culture, or, you know, that I think that's a very similar tightrope to walk. You know, it's not just
similar pathways, just
yes,
just
right. You know,
got it.
different dress standard, basically.
Yeah.
So
that's a great way of putting it.
So
that's a really good way of putting it. I like that.
So
I like that.
I think all those sort of things, and which is why also then people get spat out at the end of their work life or whatever, or community service or whatever they're doing, and suddenly, you know, what are you standing for? What do you stand by? You know, were any of those values, you know, that I went to work for or did work for, were they actually mine? And how do I look at that system that I felt was my foundation of worthiness, if it is no longer there?
Yeah, and if you achieve the thing you've always wanted to achieve and you get there and it feels empty.
Yes. Yeah, totally. Which there's a lot of people, you know, crash and hit that button. Big goals, small goals, life goals, you know, whatever. If you don't have internal validation for your thing, then, you know, and how you hold that into the future as well. Like, do I need to trumpet that every time I meet a new person? Do I need to, you know, so when you're feeling, and you just said, you know, I work in health, the area of health, I don't need to, you know, I don't need to say, and I, you know, rescued 30 people today, and, you know, that's that sort of thing. You know, that's
because you're not searching for it. You're like, oh no, that's okay, I don't need it for that. It's a tricky one. All this is to say, it's not very tricky, it's all very hard.
But I guess the biggest thing for this is, it's more that you recognize, are you always searching for external validation? Like, is any of your inner critic satisfied, even though you are searching for external validation, with any of the answers, or you're constantly, whether they are the best answer in the world or the worst answer in the world, somehow it's still switched around and wrong. And I think that's that whole inner bully, just recognizing that, and then as you said, I think journaling in that situation is a really great pathway forward out of that. Is there any books that you found that you've really read that resonated with different parts of that journey for you?
I guess not along. Might have been more what's helped to validate my experience, help me to validate my experience and where I'm at, is more just learning about what's going on with my health, and learning more about other people expressing it in a way, you know, because when it's about yourself, you find it's quite hard to talk about. It's quite hard to articulate in a way that others will understand. So reading from either people working in the field or other people with it, that has helped to validate. You know, you're not alone in this. It's helped to validate your experience.
What you're experiencing is actually your normal.
And also validating that it's how serious it is, because when it's a fluctuating illness and I can look okay for a while, I can be up and about for a little while. So getting in contact with others and reading others' experience of it, that was very validating. That sounds really trite, but, you know, the struggle is real, kind of, you know.
Totally.
You know, that was totally very validating.
I think that's for anyone that has whatever, that, you know, as we've said before, like if you have a broken arm, people can go, okay, well, that's, you know, 6 weeks, whatever, 8 weeks, you know, we should feel sympathy for this period, and then you're probably going to have a little bit of rehab, and then you'll be fine. Like, whereas if you're carrying something internally, or a mental, physical scar, but that is just not shown, That
invisible illness is very hard. I completely understand why it's so hard it's hard enough for me to understand. So I
yes.
don't
Totally. Yeah.
Especially people who don't get sick very often,
Yeah.
or they get a bad cold, but they never very rarely even get a bad flu kind of.
Yes.
So they don't have a frame of reference for it.
I just keep going. That whole comment, like that whole, and you like, even like for me with pain, like where you go, but I just keep going. Yeah, but that was a dumb thing to do. But your expectation was that you keep going, and once again, you're getting validation for all the wrong reasons then as well.
Exactly. And you're letting others stay in their comfort zone by not expressing how much pain you're in.
Yes. Yeah. And not knowing what to do with that if they did anyway. Like, to be honest, like, what are you going to do with that? So no, that whole and I think that still comes back down to then the knowing your tribe, because once again that comes down to, which is very invalidation, who is your truth teller as well. And unfortunately for most of us, if we do have a truth teller, let's qualify that, a kind truth teller, not just a jerk, that are you ready and able to hear it and to progress anything with that anyway? Like, you could have had a truth teller for 20 years, but being told that and then having an action or a pathway or something from that is a very different story. And as you said right at the beginning, like, where is your small step to go from that point? And I think that's always one of our biggest things. You can sometimes see, if you're going to change or do anything differently, you can see the end thing that you might, but you can't see the wood for the trees at that point, because to get to the top of that next mountain looks so forested, I can't hack through that undergrowth. So I guess I've got to keep going in that direction over there. And that whole looking for validation ends up in the same way. Yes, exactly. You just end up in that same loop where your self-respect, with those core values that we talked about, just keeps getting trodden in on until you can understand them better. And I think going from there, basically.
That, and not thinking it's an overnight, a short-term process. Like, from the time I admitted I was a people pleaser to doing anything about it would be very long time. I can admit, I was like, okay, I can name and admit I am a definite people pleaser, but I didn't do anything with that. Wasn't willing or able to do anything with that information or make any changes for a long time.
Totally. Same. And same of, I was probably making changes unconsciously and consciously before I even realized what the term was. But but I'd understand the consequences long before that. And as I say, that weird strong self-reliance, and yet people pleasing and external validation was a really weird mix. I think that's a good word to use. Self-reliance was rewarded. Yes, and then kindness to oneself and self-worthiness weren't contextualized in anything like I'd contextualize them now. Like, not even a ballpark of what our term now. But that's in terms of the words, they're literally the stone's throw away in terms of the attitudinal change. I was basically expecting Elon Musk to get me to Mars and back. That's the journey it's sort of been, and like that's being vaguely, well, not very self-aware at first, but obviously becoming self-aware. And yet that was, but once probably in that way I was lucky, because I didn't know the terms, that I didn't realize how high the mountain was. Like, so so I was already taking the tiny steps without realizing it. Whereas if someone had just stopped me in the track and go, you must go this path, and I looked up at the mountain as the end result, I don't know if that's way too far. Whereas I was sort of meandering along in a slightly different direction, slightly different direction. Before then, I sort of started to find that direction. And by that stage, I'd gotten a little bit more comfortable. And then I started, oh my God, there's a whole big world of this stuff that you should come to terms with. But at least I was a little bit along the line by that stage. And so for me, that probably worked in my favor, rather than, say, if I was having a therapy session or something and someone had mentioned those words, I would have, it wouldn't have resonated, wouldn't have understood, would have had to have so many therapy sessions just to get that nuance of what they were talking about, let alone starting actually changing in any way.
Behavior change.
Behavior change. Exactly. So I think that's
that's also comes into being compassionate with wherever you're at in that, as in compassionate, like, okay, well, I know this about myself, but I don't want to change it, or I can't change it. That's fine.
But see, that's where, like, if you're caring is one of your values, and compassion seems to go contrary to that. If you're living caring with the underlying people pleasing, like that, self-compassion doesn't then seem to, it's a word that then in that way, or in a lived way, seems to then contradict each other, even though the two words are, you would think they should coexist quite happily, but they don't. And they just throw big rocks at each other.
Also, to try and work through this stuff, it requires a fair bit of a reasonable amount of unraveling of all the things you've raveled so carefully raveled up. So you got to be so kind as you start to peel the onion or unravel a little bit of that. Like, you've got to be so careful and so kind and patient with yourself. And if you don't get any further than just acknowledging it, that's compassionate about that as well. Like, that's okay. That's not where you're at. And if because
in a little while you come back, you circle back, because I think you got to start somewhere. And there's and so if the first little bit is just wherever somewhere, there's a little seed that's got to land somewhere. It's got to land somewhere, and if then the seed gets forgotten for a little bit, that's fine, but it's got to land somewhere.
Yeah. That's okay.
No, that's good. All right, I think that's a good moment to wrap up that with. And I think that, which is the other Bernie Brown one of, if you own this story, you get to write the ending. And I think that's pretty much where you're saying there of, if you find the seed, if you water the seed, then you actually get to do the actual journey a little bit to yourself, and you get to write that story.
Yeah, it's quite powerful, because that's about not for anyone else, just for you. Yeah, that's quite powerful. I like that.
Yeah. So anyway, I hope that was less confusing for everyone.
That was a lot.
We went through validation and realized that we still hadn't validated ourselves.
We went on a journey. Back to the start. You have nothing to prove, people.
Thank you.
That's all right.